Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. A very warm welcome back to my 70s TV childhood. We are a podcast which looks back to what it was like to grow up as a child in 1970s Britain, and the important role that television played in our lives back then. It was a world where you could work, rest and play with a Mars bar, eat Milky Way, the sweet that you can eat between meals without ruining your appetite, or knock back a bag of Maltesers without any harm as they had the honeycomb middle which weighs so little. A world where marathons were not something everyone was bragging about to their work colleagues, about how much they raised for charity and so on, but marathons were a chocolate and nougat treat packed with peanuts. I think the rules on advertising and sweets were a bit stricter too. And yes, and then there was television. Television was something which brought us all together as families, as friends, as something to talk about in the office or the playground. You see, television was still pretty new to us Brits. We only had 3 channels, none of which broadcast continually, and there wasn't anything like catch-up or streaming back then. So if you wanted to watch something, you had to be there in front of that wooden box in the corner of your living room, otherwise you missed it. To be honest, the fare we enjoyed was variable in quality, but because there was so little on offer, it became such an important part of our lives, and it does still seem to be fondly remembered by many of you. And that's really why we produce this podcast. We do get huge amounts of engagement from you, so thank you for that. So much so that it does take me a little while to answer your emails, comments and blog posts, so if you are waiting for a response, I will get to you very soon. A few recent items from our bulging digital postbag that I'd like to highlight. Paula on YouTube let us know that she had had an exciting encounter. I met, wait for it, John Noakes one miserable rainy day on top of the Yorkshire Moors. This figure emerged through the cloud and it was him. Funny how these random things happen. Well, Paula, it certainly is, and we are extremely jealous. And then, too many of you to mention got in touch after our recent episode featuring Rod Hull and Emu, and I'm afraid many of you were none too complimentary about the pair. Gary, who wrote in via email, is typical of some of your sentiments. Rod Hull and Emu were the least funny, stupidest act on 70s TV. Their behaviour was childish, pathetic and aimed at morons. Well, thanks Gary. Instead of sitting on the fence, why don't you really tell us what you think? There were some fond memories of the pair, but mostly we seem to have touched a bit of a nerve with some of you. If you want to vent, like Gary, you can get in touch via email at oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. You can leave a message on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com or on our social media sites on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter/X and YouTube, where you have the added delight of being able to see us in full Technicolor. Now, as long-time listeners know, our social media presence has evolved over many years, and to begin with, we weren't on all the platforms we're on today. And so is the case with television, both in the UK and the US, where we got lots of our favourite shows from. If you remember, in the early 70s we had lots of US imports on kids' TV, some of which were very popular, including cartoons like Scooby-Doo, Top Cat and Wacky Races, and others which just seemed to be there to make up the numbers, to be honest, like some of the older cartoon shows like Touche Turtle and Inch High Private Eye, which, as well as filling up the numbers, were pretty rubbish. We also had imports from the US taken from their traditional Saturday morning shows, bringing us delights like the Banana Splits. Now, the Banana Splits did appear to have been created under the influence of drugs, as it was a bit weird to say the least. And as for HR Puffenstuff, I don't think there is any doubt at all that some kind of substance abuse was going on somewhere in the production team. The major networks in the US all had a wild ride from the late 1960s to the early 70s, when all the kids' shows seemed to be manic, loud, lively and full of nonsense. But after a while they seemed to get a bit tired of non-stop mayhem like the Banana Splits, and began looking for something a little less manic, but entertaining and funny nonetheless. And the show we're looking back on today was the product of that movement away from, dare I say, drug-induced psychedelia, back to something a little more, well, wholesome, I suppose. This shows a very unusual example as well, as the US import was shown first on UK TV before it was actually shown in the US. I remember the first episode very well, and I guess I must have seen it when I got back from school one afternoon in May 1976. It was also one of those TV shows which helped us all out by setting up the premise during its opening sequence.
Big John has a problem, as you can plainly see. 1 minute he's 40, the next he's 33. Big John keeps a changing before your very eyes. He's 25 and then 19, then 12 years old inside. Big John, little John, what a way to grow. Big John, little John, grew from high to low. Big John found the fountain of youth, he drank a little drink. And that magic water is the thing that made him shrink. Now, even when he's little John, he never knows just when. Zap, he'll change and rearrange, and he's Big John again.
Big John, Little John was a little different from many of the short-lived US shows we got to see in the 1970s. It was a bit slower, more deliberate in its plotting and acting, and generally tried to be a show which might make both children and their parents laugh. If you didn't pick it up from the opening theme, the show's main premise was that a 40-year-old science teacher called John Martin, played by Herb Edelman, has a problem, as he keeps being changed into a 12-year-old boy. While in holiday in Florida, he drank from a spring, which, what do you know, turns out to be the legendary Fountain of Youth, unsuccessfully sought by Juan Ponce de Leon. The water changes him into a 12-year-old boy, played by Robbie Rist, and back again with many hilarious consequences. The changes happen spontaneously, and John has no warning until he starts to change. And because Martin only sipped the water, the changes are recurring and not permanent. So according to legend, had he taken a full drink, he would be aged 12 permanently. Are you still with me? Only his wife Marjorie, played by Joyce Bulifant, who I will always associate with Airplane, where she plays one of the passengers, and his son Ricky, played by Mike Darnell, know his secret. Martin's students who befriend him when he transforms to Little John, and his boss, Principal Bertha Bottomley, played by Olive Dunbar, do become a bit suspicious as something unusual is going on. Well, as you can imagine, if the teacher keeps disappearing from the classroom and a little boy comes instead. Anyway, the Martin family explain that the younger John is their nephew who's staying with them. Ah, that's all right then. And throughout the series, Big John unsuccessfully tries to find a cure for his predicament. But his experiences as Little John often give him insights into what his students are facing that he, as a 40-year-old man, may not have necessarily recognised. So the setup for each episode was fairly similar along these lines. Big John sets out to do something grown-up, like an interview for head of the school science department, which happens in the first episode. Something else at work, a school trip, a romantic dinner with his wife, or something else reasonably mundane. And then something triggers a transformation. We never really know what brings it on, but what is guaranteed is that he becomes Little John at the worst possible moment, and a chaotic cover-up ensues, and Little John tries to pass as Big John's nephew or the neighbour's kid or a random visiting child. Then, after lots of larking about and funny situations, there is a suitable resolution. Like, John does get to be head of department after all, and, almost inevitably, he learns a life lesson, and returns to his 40-year-old body, embarrassed but wiser. At the heart of it, John is constantly trying to live a normal adult life, holding down a job, enjoying his marriage, while hiding the fact that he intermittently becomes a cheeky child. In essence, I suppose it's a bit like the Incredible Hulk, although in reverse, if you assume that Hulk wasn't a big green monster but was a precocious 12-year-old. The show combined sitcom misunderstandings with moral lessons, slapstick, and a light touch of fantasy, all quite attractive to the 9-year-old me during the spring and early summer of 1976. And here's an example of the sort of thing I mean, which might not make it onto the screen today. Little John is being pursued by two of his 12-year-old classmates to take them to the forthcoming Plymouth Rock dance. And Big John, that's John at age 40, happens to meet one of them alone in the classroom.
Good afternoon, Karen.
Hi, Mr. Martin. I'm waiting for Little John.
Karen, mind if we have a little chat?
About what?
About Little John.
Okay.
Admittedly, he is quite attractive.
Little John?
Yes, you do think he's a rather handsome young man, don't you?
I wouldn't exactly use the word handsome.
You're all right, but I think the word gorgeous is going too far.
So why?
At any rate, I can fully understand the fascination with a 12-year-old who's so, it's so hard to find the right word to describe him.
Try show off. That's what he really is.
I beg your pardon?
I know he's your nephew, Mr. Martin, but well, actually, he's a wimp.
A what?
A wimp. A drag. A zero. A zilch.
Yes, but from the way you acted toward him, I thought that...
Oh, well, that was just to make Ricky jealous. I wanted Ricky to ask me to the dance.
Oh, of course. Why do you call him a wimp, a drag, a zero,
A zilch. Because he's always using such big words to sound like a big man. You know, he talks as if he were you.
Yeah, well, he can't help that.
Well, he could try, the wimp.
I wish you wouldn't call him that.
I'm sorry, sir, but, well, what am I going to do about Ricky?
Now that Little John is out of the picture, my advice is to tell Ricky the truth.
I guess I could tell Ricky, but
What?
could you sort of tell Little John for me?
Well, I suppose I could.
I'd be too embarrassed to tell him that I was using him.
Yeah, well, I understand.
Then will you break it to him?
Consider it broken. Oh, a wimp. A drag. Zero. Zilch.
So, the big issue is solved. The girls were only trying to make John's son Ricky jealous, and all can be happily resolved, and everybody has a great time at the dance. But the idea of a middle-aged man, albeit in a 12-year-old's body, taking a girl to a dance is a bit odd, to say the least. But, you know, it was mid-70s. We weren't thinking in the sort of ways we're necessarily thinking today, and it all works out in the end. It was a common theme in 70s and 80s TV and movies of swapping bodies and swapping ages, which I guess ended up giving us films like Big and vice versa. So I suppose Big John, Little John was ahead of its time on this one, although it's still a bit strange. It's interesting thinking about this looking back from my late 50s to this show, as it deals with some themes which are really only apparent to me just now. Even though it's played for laughs, there's a relatable anxiety at the heart of Big John's predicament. Adults often wish they could be young again. But the show does flip that idea and shows that being a child again can actually make your life a bit harder. When he is transformed into Little John, John can't drive. He can't do his job in the classroom. He has to lie constantly. If anything, the show suggests that youth is only appealing when you can pick and choose the moments. Big John wants to be responsible, but Little John wants to have fun. I'm sure many of us have had that feeling throughout our adult lives, so it does play on that thought. I think I might be overdoing my analysis again. Sorry everyone. It was a short-lived children's TV show which does stick in my memory because it was a genuinely interesting basis for a show, as well as being reasonably amusing and well acted. The cast were experienced pros. Herb Edelman, who played Big John, was a well-known face on US TV, as he played guest or support characters on a huge number of shows including Chips, The Streets of San Francisco, Cannon, Happy Days, Kojak, Fantasy Island and many, many others. Big John Little John was a rare lead role for him, and thinking back, he obviously enjoyed doing it. Later on, his career became well known, both here and in the US, for long-running roles on The Golden Girls and in the hospital drama St. Elsewhere. Little John was played by Robbie Rist, who was already well known as a star of the popular US show The Brady Bunch, where he was introduced late on its run as Cousin Oliver, a sweet, wisecracking young child. His introduction was meant to help the show improve falling ratings and attract a different demographic, but it actually hastened the demise of the show and introduced a new term to TV production, the Cousin Oliver effect, where a new young character is inexplicably introduced into a TV show for no apparent reason. However, such a character is likely to upset the dynamic of the show, especially since his only job is to be cute. It's far too easy for writers to miss sweetly precocious and fall right into overbearing and annoying little git. Depending on how deft the writers are at making him lovable, the Cousin Oliver character could become a fan favourite, or more often, a disaster. Who can remember the introduction of Scrappy-Doo to Scooby-Doo? A lesson in kind. Anyway, that wasn't Robbie's fault, and he too seems to have had a great time making Big John Little John. So, why did the show only last one season of 13 episodes? I think there are a few reasons. The fact that it was shown in the UK before it was launched in the US suggests that the network that made it didn't really know what to do with it. It was a live-action, mildly amusing comedy show, trying to compete with bold, brash cartoons and the mayhem of Saturday morning US TV shows. It was a bit too mature for the very youngest viewers, but probably not mature enough for adults. With hindsight, it was probably perfect for 9-year-olds, which I'm guessing is why I remember it so well. It remains well remembered because it was a bit different, and also because of that earworm of a theme tune.
Big John has a problem, as you can plainly see. 1 minute he's 40, the next he's 33. Big John keeps a changing before your very eyes. He's 25, and then 19, then 12 years old in size. Big John, Little John, what a way to grow. Big John, Little John, grew from high to low. Big John.
Do you remember Big John Little John? Have you discovered the fountain of youth on a recent holiday? If so, then do get in touch by one of the various means I mentioned earlier. Details are also in our show notes. That's all we have time for now. We will be back next week with our next 70s TV trivia quiz, and then again in a fortnight with our next regular podcast. Until then, be nice to each other, and do remember to like, rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And do join us again soon for more from My 70s TV Childhood.